Can everyone hear me okay at this volume? I'm going to try and project because we're a little sound challenged today. All right, okay, thank you. So this past Thursday, September 22nd, was the Autumn Equinox, day when the hours of light and dark are equally balanced. And the equinox marks the official end of summer and the beginning of fall for those of us in the northern hemisphere anyway. And from this point on, the hours of darkness will lengthen and the daytime diminishes until we reach the winter solstice and the maximum extent of night for the year. And all around us, you may have noticed, the leaves are beginning to color and fall from the trees. I took my dog out yesterday morning for a walk early in the morning, and at first I thought I was hearing the beginning of a rain shower, but actually it was the steady rain of leaves from the trees in the schoolyard across the road, skittering on the pavement. Many of us have beloved traditions associated with the fall. Maybe we go apple picking at an orchard, or we do hay rides and cider. We get one last bonfire or camping trip in before it gets too cold for comfort. Maybe we do seasonal crafts, if that's our thing. Maybe you're a wizard with a corn cob. A popular comedy piece that goes around the internet this time of year is an expletive-laden paean to the wonders of decorative gourd season. Maybe you've seen it. And soon enough, it will be time for Halloween and Thanksgiving. So fall is a season rich with tradition. And at this specific time of year, that of the fall equinox, many pagans are celebrating Mabon. So if that is you, happy Mabon to you and yours. And Mabon is a harvest festival celebrating what would be the second harvest of the year in the traditional cycle of agriculture. It's a celebration of productivity as we gather up the fruits of our labors and see where we're at, give thanks for what we have, and share with those who need it. It's also a time to recognize that with the tipping of the balance towards the darkness, the soil will soon cease to yield up its riches, and so we are entering a time of decay, but also a time of preparation, of latency, and of rest. Autumn is a time of year that draws the soul inward. There's a poetry to this season of gaudy celebration and slow decay, as nature explodes into a riot of red, orange, purple, yellow, all the while slowly fading away to brown and gray. The poets have paid tribute both to autumn's beauty and its somber undertones. Albert Camus said, "Autumn is a second spring when every leaf is a flower." George Eliot enthused, "Delicious autumn, my very soul is wedded to it. And if I were a bird, I would fly about the earth seeking the successive autumns." And even staid Emily Dickinson wrote the lines, "The maple wears a gayer scarf, the field a scarlet gown. Lest I should be old-fashioned, I'll put a trinket on." Slow down there, Emily. Take it easy. And yet, on the other hand, the poet Stanley Kunitz in The End of Summer laments. "An agitation of the air, a perturbation of the light admonished me the unloved year would turn on its hinge that night. I stood in the disenchanted field amid the stubble and the stones, amazed while a small worm lisped to me the song of my marrow bones. Already the iron door of the north clangs open, birds leave snows, order their populations forth, and a cruel wind blows." So that's pretty dramatic. Show of hands, how many people have had a small worm lisp to you the song of your marrow bones? In the last week, say just in the last week. That's the song of the grave, I assume, as in autumn, the flowers, the fruits, the leaves, the grains are given over to the relentless turning of the worm in the soil, as eventually are we all. Season of celebration, season of decay. Of course, we live in a modern world where ease of transportation means food grown anywhere on the globe is available to us pretty much all the time. So we are somewhat insulated from the rhythm of the seasons. Right? It's always spring or summer somewhere. So if I want peaches in November or asparagus in February, I can probably have it, although it may not taste very good and it may be kind of painful to my wallet. But the season of winter no longer necessarily makes its presence felt to us as a time of scarcity, And so it is relatively easy for us moderns to be disconnected from our dependency on the natural world. We may understand it intellectually, but we won't necessarily feel it viscerally. If anything, our cultural mythos, stretching back to the book of Genesis, emphasizes our mastery over and our separation from creation. With the scientific and technological revolutions of the 19th and 20th century putting the stamp of approval on the idea that nature is ours to control. Now, Unitarian Universalism draws on the wisdom of many faith traditions, including pagan and earth-based traditions. And one of the central insights of those traditions is to emphasize our continuity with nature, our continuity. We humans are a continuation of the natural world, not the master of it, not set apart from it. We are a continuation of the natural world. And this is also the view of modern science. It all depends on the perspective that one chooses to adopt scientifically. On the one hand, I am clearly a distinct self with a distinct boundary, separate from other beings and the world around me. On the other hand, there's a constant interchange of energy and matter between me and my surroundings, so that my boundary is actually porous. I am creating my environment, and my environment is also creating me, and it is a dance that we do. And then on the other hand, in the big picture, all of the universe is the same unfolding process, and I am not distinct from it at all. I am the unfolding of the universe. So scientifically speaking, I am a temporarily stable sort of whirl of matter and energy within the larger movement of matter and energy that is the universe. I am an organized pattern that is temporarily capturing and sort of trapping and absorbing atoms and energy that could be used for some other purpose, but for the time being, they've been co-opted into the expression of being a Jamie Hinson-Rieger. And someday that matter and energy will be released into another purpose. And the creation and organization of new forms requires the dissolution of old forms, including eventually this physical body. Whether I go away along with my body or which parts of me go away with my body is subject to debate, but the universe is in this constant motion of building up and falling away. And pagan traditions embrace creation and destruction as co-equal participants in the dance of life. The season of fall, the season of spring, you need one to have the other. Death is not the opposite of life, it is the continuation of the creative process which makes life possible. And in this creative process, there is joy and there is pain, there is loss and enrichment, there is falling away and renewal. And we embrace it all because it is all the same continuous process. And in death, we see a release of energy into new channels, a breaking of old patterns that opens the way for new possibilities. So we honor death as well. Now, science uses the language of physics and chemistry and genetics and statistics and differential equations and all that to talk about this continuous unfolding of the universe, these unbroken physical processes. But religion uses the language of poetry and myth. And the procession of the seasons, the cycle of fertility and decay, this dance of creation and destruction has been the subject of song and story for as long as we have been telling stories and singing songs. We already mentioned today the Greek tale of Persephone's descent into the underworld, how Persephone was tricked by Hades into eating the pomegranate seeds and thus doomed to remain underground for 6 months out of the year, and how her mother mourns for her missing daughter, which causes the earth to fall into decay. And the story of Persephone has echoes of a much earlier, maybe less well-known story, a Sumerian myth about the goddess Inanna, queen of the heavens, and of her descent into the underworld. And like Persephone and Demeter, the Inanna story explains the changing seasons, but it's embedded in a much larger myth of creation and death and renewal. And the story of Inanna begins this way. From the great above, she opened her ear to the great below. From the great above, the goddess opened her ear to the great below. From the great above, Inanna opened her ear to the great below. And you see that hypnotic pattern of repetition in a lot of Sumerian poetry, because these are songs and rituals and incantations all sort of wrapped into one. But in the myth, Inanna has opened her ear to the great below, meaning she is seeing into the underworld, and she's learned that her sister Ereshkigal, who was the queen of the underworld, is preparing funeral rites for her husband, and Inanna has decided that she wants to be there. So she tells her faithful maidservant, I'm going into the underworld. If I'm not back in 3 days, go get help. Sensible. And then she proceeds to the gates of the underworld, where she tells the gatekeeper, Nettie, that she would enter so that she can observe the funeral rites. And Nettie confers with Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld, and we read that the queen of the underworld slaps her thigh and bites her lip with rage at the news. She's enraged at this idea. There's no love lost between Ereshkigal and Inanna is not a welcome addition to the funeral, and possibly that's because Inanna is actually responsible for the death of Ereshkigal's husband. That's another myth, but it's bruised feelings there. But anyway, Ereshkigal tells Nettie, the gatekeeper, bar the 7 gates of the underworld to Inanna, and only let her through if she will remove one of her possessions at each of the gates. So Nettie tells Inanna, you can come through the gate, the first gate, but you have to remove your crown as Queen of Heaven. And Inanna is indignant, and she demands to know why. Why must I remove my crown? And Nettie answers, the Queen of the underworld is perfect, and her rules may not be questioned. So Inanna takes off her crown, sets aside her designation as Queen of the Heavens, and she proceeds. And at the second gate, she is told, you must remove your sacred necklace before you can proceed. And Inanna removes the necklace, and so on. At each gate, another item is stripped away from her. Her crown, her necklace, her rings, her scepter, eventually even her clothes, until she has descended fully into the underworld to appear naked and humbled before her sister. Naked and humbled. And her sister, still full of wrath, calls on the judges of the underworld to pronounce judgment on Inanna, and they find her guilty, whereupon Ereshkigal strikes her dead and hangs her body on the wall. This is why you have to check the Yelp reviews before lodging somewhere. Now, ultimately, Inanna is freed from the underworld by divine intercession. It's kind of a long story. We won't go into all of the details. But her body is made whole and renewed by drinking and eating the bread of life and the water of life. And suffice it to say that no one has ever simply just let go from the underworld. It is never that simple to get out of the underworld, that you were just let go. There's always a catch. And in this case, the catch is that one of Inanna's beloved companions ends up having to partially take her place for 6 months out of the year. And that is the time during which Inanna laments, and the earth is cold and barren. So this is the explaining the seasons part of the myth of Inanna. But the myth is also much larger than that. And I like myths because they help me remember things in a compelling way. I like myths to remember things. And the Inanna story, I think, is a reminder, among many other things that it is, it's a reminder of how spiritual renewal and spiritual growth involve embracing creative forces of change which can feel like death or dissolution at the time. It's about how newness in our life involves a falling away of old things. Inanna's descent and return mirrors the journey of the seasons, from spring to winter and back to spring, but it is also the story of spiritual growth. And the story of Inanna's descent into the underworld is really the story of the soul's descent into itself, and what we encounter when we go deep into our own spirit and risk encountering new truths about who we are. It is the story of the season of winter in our own life, the necessary spaces of quiet and stillness and even death that we must move through sometimes in order to release old patterns and unfold new possibilities. And the deceptiveness of winter is that it seems so cold and still and barren when in its own way it is an intensely fertile time. Winter is absolutely an essential part of the process of renewal. And in the same way, we may go through periods in our own life that may seem frozen and barren to those around us or even to ourselves, but that may in the same way prove to be the preparatory season for great new growth in our own lives. To allow ourselves to go quietly inward, to allow ourselves those periods of pregnant dormancy can require a spiritual maturity and patience, and to acquiesce even to the falling away, to the death of some part of ourselves can require great courage, but it is essential sometimes if new life is to emerge. And the Inanna myth begins with the death of her sister's husband. And Inanna wants to observe the funeral rites for this death, but that's kind of a way of keeping death at bay. It is experiencing the cycle of life and death at remove. Death in this case has been contained and protected by ritual and formula. But Ereshkigal has something else in mind for Inanna, because the creative energies of the spirit cannot be tamed in that way. And the creative energy of creative destruction cannot be tamed in that way. And in the same way, Inanna wants to enter the underworld as queen of the heavens. She wants to be protected by all the trappings of her office. She is armored in her identity as queen of the heavens. In the same way, we sometimes go through life armored in our own identity, wrapped up in the stories that we tell about who we are, or the stories that we allow other people to tell about who we are. And think of all of the layers of identity that we may wear. The dutiful son, the wayward daughter, the middle child, the sensible one, the irresponsible one, the artistic one, the good mother, the good father, the good friend, the bad friend, the one who's always late, sibling, husband, wife, partner, student, owner, citizen, grandparent, senior. Think of all of the roles and responsibilities that they anchor us and they ground us, but they can also misdirect us or lock us in place, and we can wear those identities as an armor to keep the forces of creative renewal at bay. But we cannot enter the underworld, which is to say we cannot enter the truly pregnant spaces inside of ourselves armored in this way. And so Ereshkigal demands that Inanna remove all of the trappings of her power and identity as she begins her descent, one layer at a time. And the only way she can go deeper into the underworld, deeper into herself, is to remove another layer. And so when she finally reaches her destination, she's been laid bare of all of her possessions, removed of all of her layers of identity, and she must confront the forces of life and death literally naked, in this position of intense vulnerability. And so the question for our spiritual journey in our life is, are we willing to allow ourselves that same vulnerability? When we remove those layers of identity one by one, who do we see that remains? And if some of those identities have become ill-fitting or worn out, are we prepared to let them go, let them pass away, let them die even, to allow new life to be breathed into us or into them? Which parts of ourselves are we willing to allow to die, metaphorically, that like Inanna they may be reborn? And the mythic insight of paganism and the Inanna story is that death, that creative destruction, that this falling away is essential to fertility and growth and creation. We need seasons of winter and spring in our life. We need the energy and warmth of light, but we also need the stillness and rest of the dark. And so paganism embraces and honors both the dark and the light, seeking to balance these energies in our lives. Whereas we moderns tend to view time as this sort of relentless arrow directing our life forward from goal to achievement in a linear fashion, pagan traditions emphasize the circular nature of time, because the seasons are ever turning and returning. And in the same way, the forces of light and dark, death and renewal, these are circular recurrences in our life. And we need seasons of winter and seasons of spring in our life. To dance, to sing, to create, to love, to turn cartwheels in the warmth of the sun, these are wonderful things. But sometimes we also need rest, we need stillness, we need the cool shelter in darkness. We need quiet conversations with our own spirit under a patient canopy of stars that is ancient. We need nighttime for dreaming. The poet John Seuss wrote, "To be of earth is to know the restlessness of being a seed, the darkness of being planted, the struggle toward the light, the pain of growth into the light, the joy of bursting and bearing fruit, the love of being food for someone, the scattering of your seeds, the decay of the seasons, the mystery of death, and the miracle of birth." And as we mark the equinox, this day when light and dark are in balance, I invite you to honor the balance of light and dark in your own life. Honor each season as it recurs in your life and in your spirit. The darkness of being planted, the joy of bearing fruit. To these things we find ourselves turning and returning, and this is the way it is meant to be. And so for the mystery of death and the miracle of rebirth, the wheel in which we are all turning, may we be grateful. Amen, and blessed be.